In this video, we're going to talk about the differences between Kanban and Scrum boards. The way that I like to view Kanban boards is for ongoing work. So for example, if you have a manufacturing process or a manufacturing line, first you're going to kit the material, then you're going to put it through the first build and assembly phase, and then once it's built and assembled, you're probably going to put it through some sort of testing. Once it passes test, it'll probably have to be kitted with anything that it's going to ship with, and then you'll take it over to shipping and actually package it and get it ready to get sent out. While all of this is going on, once something moves from the kitted phase to the assembly phase, the next item that's in that pipeline is going to be kitted, and that's just a lot of ongoing work. So when you think about Kanban boards, I would think about ongoing work that doesn't necessarily have a start and a finish. You're constantly moving, constantly running, very similar to a conveyor belt in a manufacturing process. This can work for some engineering or development teams. It also depends on a couple of other items. So one, in order to determine whether or not your team should use a Kanban or a Scrum board, you should ask yourself, is my team doing ongoing work, or is it a fixed time box? And then two, the second question you need to ask yourself is whether or not your team has a project manager or someone that can create sprints and time box the amount of work that your team is doing. If you do have a project manager that is able to time box your work, then you might be looking more at a Scrum board. If you don't have a project manager and you have ongoing work, then a Kanban board may better suit your needs just because it has less upkeep. And when we head into Jira, I'll show you a little bit more about what I'm talking about. Scrum is typically used for a higher level fixed project, and you want to break down those high level deliverables into more actionable items that can be completed within the next week or 2 weeks or 3 weeks or 4 weeks. And that duration is what determines the duration of your sprints. And so let's go ahead and go over to Jira, and I'll show you a little bit more about what that looks like. Coming over to my demo project in Jira, you'll see that I'm currently under the new product development demo project, and I've created two boards. I have a Scrum board and I have a Kanban board. If you come over to the Kanban board, first you can see that there are a lot more things in here than there were in the Scrum board. And that's because when you come onto the Scrum board is only showing you things that are in the active sprint. So as you can see, I have a button over here that says complete sprint. This is not all of the work in the project. This is only the work that we are targeting for this sprint. And so in the Scrum board, if I come over to the backlog, you'll see on the backlog that I have this sprint number 1, and this is the sprint that's currently active because I have the option to complete the sprint. So this is all the work for this project that we're planning on completing from March 6th through March 20th. Then here, if you come and you look at this next sprint, this is all the work that we're targeting from March 20th through March 3rd. So it helps you break out the work that you need to complete into just little chunks. So you're only focusing, when you go to the active sprint and Scrum board, you're only focusing on the things that you need to worry about right during this time. What this means, though, is it really requires someone to do sprint planning meetings with your team. These are conversations that you'll need to hold with your engineering or your development teams and say, okay, well, for the next 2 weeks, what are we going to work on? And in which case, you'll need to create a sprint. You'll need to name it. You'll need to choose the duration of it. If you come here and you can go to Edit Sprint, you can choose the duration. You can choose 2 weeks, you can choose 3, 4, or a custom length. I typically prefer 2 weeks at a time. You choose the start date and the end date, and you can even enter a sprint goal on what you're trying to complete within those 2 weeks. What you'll need to do is you'll need to take a look at the rest of the work on the backlog and determine which items need to be pulled into that sprint. So you can click and you can drag and you can move that into a sprint, or you can click here and go to move to, and you can move it to whichever sprint you decide, or you can right click, move to, and then move it to whatever sprint you see fit. So that's just something to keep in mind, that if you do in fact want to use a Scrum board and narrow down what you're seeing on that board to just what you need to focus on for the next couple weeks, you probably need someone that can, similarly to a project manager or a Scrum master, that can come in, plan the sprints ahead of time, hold those sprint planning meetings, and also keep an eye on the backlog and make control and that you are on track with your sprints for your overall project timeline. And so, if you do have a project timeline and you do just want to narrow those down into more bite-sized chunks, sprints and Scrum boards are probably the way to go for you, especially if you do have a project manager or a Scrum master that can help lead these sprint planning sessions so that your team can focus on just what they need to do for the next 2 weeks. So coming over to this NPD Sprint 1, you can see here that for Prototype A, these are the things that we're working on. And then for Prototype B, we're looking at gathering those product requirements. Everything else that's on this backlog or in other sprints for the future, like finalizing the design or anything like that, that will not show or populate on the Scrum board. And so if I toggle back over, again, I'm under the NPD Scrum board, currently on the backlog view. If I toggle back over to active sprints, this is your Scrum board, and you will see that for Prototype A, it doesn't have all of the tasks here for this prototype. It only has the tasks that we have in the sprint or that we're targeting to complete within the next 2 weeks. Same thing with Prototype B. We only have product requirements that we are trying to complete within these next 2 weeks. So we don't get the full view of everything going on. Like I said, there is some upkeep and some work. So if you are looking to use a Scrum or a Sprint board, either you or a project manager or a Scrum master will probably need to go through and facilitate those conversations. Now let's say you don't have a project manager or a Scrum master to be able to facilitate those events, and you don't really have the extra time to hold those sprint planning conversations. Or if your work is just ongoing, you can choose to do a Kanban board. A Kanban board has less upkeep and maintenance than a sprint or a Scrum board does because you don't need to hold those sprint planning sessions. You don't need to hold those sprint planning sessions because what a Kanban board does is it dumps all of the tasks, for example, this prototype. It dumps all of the tasks on the backlog for this prototype here. So you can see it goes down quite a bit. Now, you can just continue to move things along, and anything that you haven't done yet can just stay in the to-do column or on your backlog. Here you can see we have these 2 items in progress. We have 1 item on hold, and as you begin to work on things, right, you can move them to either on hold, cancel, or done. And then you can pull the next item from the backlog in progress. So this is one way that Kanban boards work. Similarly, for Prototype B, you can see that this is the only thing that we have on the backlog for Prototype B at the moment. But if we wanted to create another item, like creating a preliminary bill of materials, then we can create that, and all of these are just here on your Kanban board. The other thing that you'll notice is up here on the top, when you are under a Kanban board, there is no backlog. Whereas in the Scrum board, there was a backlog button. So let me show you. If you go to Scrum, you will see that you have that backlog view where you can organize your backlog and see all of your tasks in this view or filter on them by epic. The reason the backlog view exists is for the sprint planning and those backlog grooming sessions. When you're on a Kanban board, the reason that backlog does not exist is because the Kanban board does act as your backlog because you are pulling in everything that you would need to do for this epic. And so when creating a Jira project, you should always create it under a Scrum template. But whether you create your project, and if you have a Scrum board first, you can always come here and you can create another board, a Kanban board or a Scrum board. So when you're asking yourself, well, should my team operate with Kanban? Should my team operate with Scrum? Consider, again, those two questions. One, does my team do ongoing work, or do we have a fixed deadline? If you do ongoing work, you might want to lean towards a Kanban board. If you have a fixed deadline for your project or a completion date, you would likely want to lean towards Scrum. And the second question is, do I have a project manager, Scrum Master, or am I willing to go through, hold those sprint planning sessions and backlog grooming sessions so my team can plan out their work 2 weeks, 3 weeks, 4 weeks at a time in a sprint, and I manage the backlog. If you have a project manager or a Scrum Master and you have a fixed deadline for your project, you may also want to lean towards a Scrum board. There really is no right or wrong answer here when you are choosing a Scrum board or a Kanban board. Remember to always pick whatever works the best for your team and for your business, but those are some general guidelines that I like to provide when companies and teams ask, should I use a Kanban board or a Scrum board in my Jira project? Hope this video helps. Remember, go through, create both a Kanban board and a Scrum board, and just check them out. See which one will work best for your needs.